Hope everybody's got their lunches with them and their microphone off. Right. How are we going there? Everybody in so far? Shall I get started? Okay, I think we might get started. So welcome everyone. Thanks for coming along today to another one of our Lunch and Learn series for 2022. We're aiming to host one of these sessions on the last Thursday of every month and hope you're finding them useful. If you don't already know me, I'm Danny King, the Program Manager for City Switch across the Greater Metro regions. The rest of the City Switch team is also available on the call today, including Katie from City of Sydney and Ali from North Sydney. So a warm welcome from all of us City Switch Program Managers. Just so you're aware, this session is being recorded and it will be made available on our YouTube channel afterwards as well. So let's get started. First, I'd like to do just welcome our country. I'm currently in the City of Melbourne, and the City of Melbourne respectfully acknowledges the traditional owners of the land that we govern, the Wurundjeri, Wurrung and the Boonwurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin, and pays respect to their elders past, present and emerging. We acknowledge and honour the unbroken spiritual, cultural and political connection to the Wurundjeri, Boonwurrung, Dja Dja Wurrung, Toonarong and Wadawurrung peoples, I hope I've said that correctly, of the Eastern Kulin, and that they have this unique place for more than 2,000 generations. We are committed to our reconciliation journey because at its heart, reconciliation is about strengthening relationships between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal peoples for the benefits of all. I'd also like to recognise that today is actually National Sorry Day. National Sorry Day was first observed in 1998. However, the formal apology didn't come until 2008 by Prime Minister Kevin Rudd. National Sorry Day is a day to recognise the harm done to Indigenous families, particularly with the stolen generations, to recognise the works being undertaken to repair that damage, and to acknowledge the strength of the stolen generation survivors. I think it's important that we reflect on how all Australians can play a part in the healing process for the people and a nation. While this date carries great significance for the stolen generations and other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, it's also commemorated by Australians right around the country. And tomorrow, Friday, is the start of National Reconciliation Week. It runs from Friday the 27th of May to the 3rd of June, and we hope that you have a chance to attend an event or run one of your own over the coming weeks. Now on to the session. So today we're focusing on healthy offices and specifically airflow, well ratings, and how to make the office environment as healthy as it can be. First, we'll hear from Dr. Dominic Hess about the Breath project the City of Melbourne and some industry partners have been collaborating on. Then we'll hear from Devan Valenti from the International Wellbeing Institute, who will talk about the well ratings and provide some case studies for us. We'll then follow that with a Q&A session where you can ask your questions to the panel or pop them into the chat. And in the final 10 minutes, we're going to use the breakout rooms to just meet some new faces, share our experiences, and just generally connect with each other. So just firstly, why are we focusing on this? Well, 90% of our lives are spent indoors, and the environment indoors can actually have a lasting impact on our health. We've still got quite a lot of COVID in our community, and many are concerned about returning to the office because of that. Every business can do something about it, whether you own the building or whether you're a tenant. And being part of City Switch includes a commitment to work towards having healthy office environments because they matter for staff health, wellbeing and productivity. So now I'd like to introduce you to Dominique Hess. She's our Zero Carbon Building Lead at the City of Melbourne and Chair of the Board of Greenfleet. With degrees in science, engineering, architecture and a certificate in governance, Dominique brings an interdisciplinary approach to all of her work. Dominique has also been the driving force behind getting the Breath project up and running, and she's now going to tell us a bit about what was done and a preview of the findings. Over to you, Dominique.
Can I check that you can see my slides?
Yep.
Great.
Got it.
Excellent. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity of sharing this all with you. Now, I have to swear you all to silence because this hasn't been made public yet, but in the next week or so, you'll see it in the media, and so you've had a sneak preview. Okay, so the reason that we did this research was that we have a lot of people who live and work in the city, and those coming back, and we'd like to attract them back to the city. And there are concerns, as Danny outlined, about airborne contamination. But particularly with my hat on as a zero carbon building lead, I was very concerned about the fact that the current recommendations, which are open up whatever windows you can open, flush your buildings before and after use, bring down HEPA filter, additional filtration systems into the building space, UV lights, etc., can have up to a 50% increase in our energy use. And most of us are keen on our neighbours' ratings, right? And that can send us backwards by a significant amount. But also, I don't think it needs to be an energy or health question. I think we can improve the health while reducing energy consumption. And so I was very interested in that. And obviously, retrofit brings work and so forth to the city. So we set up the Breath project, partnering with CBUS and the University of Melbourne to do the research. And what I was particularly interested in was, can we improve air quality while improving energy efficiency and reducing COVID transmission? CBUS property gave us access to a vacant building. Well, it wasn't vacant, but a couple of vacant floors in a building that's going to be demolished from next week. And we installed 3 different systems. And then over March and April, we tested those systems. And you are about to see the results. But first, a little bit of background. So the tests that we did were a baseline. So what are the current conditions? This was floor 10. So we had floor 10, level 1 and 10 that we did our tests on. So this had furniture and the other one did not. So here we have the baseline. So we looked at air rate changes and so forth, energy use. Then we looked at what was being recommended. So opening up the windows, increasing air rate changes. We didn't do the additional filtration or the flushing aspects, just the opening the windows and increased air changes from that. We looked at in-ceiling filtration. Because of the speed of the project, so we were given the building just at the end of January, and we started testing in March, so we had a month to fit out the spaces. We couldn't get the right filters. They stuck on a ship somewhere, so the research team MacGyvered them, but really they look like this. So, displacement ventilation, column-based displacement ventilation, so it's the same air handling unit, you just move the air from coming down from the ceiling down to the floor level, and some personal air delivery. Lots of questions about whether that worked or didn't, so wanted to test that out. Why those particular options? Well, I was particularly taken, a colleague of mine back when we had September 11 and the Pentagon got, a section of the Pentagon got hit. They rebuilt that bit with displacement ventilation, but if you remember, 3/4 of the building was still fine. And so they wanted to look what could they retrofit to give the same health benefits as the new bit. And so Malcolm did this piece of research, which he said, here you've got standard ventilation where the air is being mixed from the top. This person's got COVID or opening a letter with anthrax or whatever, and you could see from the very first second that's being mixed throughout the space, and everyone has had a medium to extreme contact with that virus. So I was interested in seeing, well, this is a model. I'd like to see things in the real world. And so this is the space. If just as a reminder, so someone sat here and they sneezed, and we followed that sneeze, simulated, right? They had a 3-litre bottle of milk full of empty bottle of milk full of gas, and they just squeezed it. And that air travelled, as was predicted, up to 8 metres. So the mixing ventilation was mixing that through. So here you see one of our researchers. Here's the bottle, and here we have a partition. You see him squeezing that. It goes over. this person is hit by it, but not just that, it travels all the way across the room, all the way to this side of the room. So there's that travel. Not even your partitions stop that from happening because of the type of ventilation. So we showed that that was a possible, that was true in real world. And so then we put the displacement ventilation in and did a similar test. Same air handling unit, same velocity of air. All we did was make the air slightly warmer by 2 degrees because you don't need as cold an air coming down at floor level. So Malcolm's research shows that this person here is still infected or opening the letter, and you can see that nobody's been had even the slightest little bit of potential transmission. You'll be able to see the person opening the letter or sneezing or coughing any second now. And you can see what happens with that because of the displacement coming down low and then traveling up through the heat of our bodies and our computers, it just goes straight out the ceiling. So you have that upward momentum of how air naturally moves as it warms. And so it takes that away. So again, interested, is that real? So here's a little video. Here's our displacement ventilation, same thing. Here's our milk bottle. Liam's about to sneeze, and here it goes. And you can see no traveling. Goes to here. He sneezed 3 times, in fact. It goes to here, and it just goes up and out. So we were very happy with that. So yes, we thought that's working. And then we looked at energy, and here we see across temperature how the energy is working. And I don't have a lot of time, but the headline is with the open windows on the warmest days that we tested, we had an increase of about 20% of energy use for the running of the fans and the keeping of comfort conditions. And when we used displacement, that went down by 18%. Cost benefits, so they did a whole lot of modelling, and I'll give you the highlight of that in a second. But basically, very little cost for the in-ceiling filters. Displacement added a cost for that retrofit, but also saved a significant amount of energy, and the ASHRAE added a lot of energy because you had to keep running the system at full belt to keep the comfort conditions. So, and the retrofit costs are here, and I'll show you a summary in a minute. And these are the payback terms that from the energy savings based on a very mild summer in February and March. So here are the highlight savings and costs. And as I said, sworn you to secrecy, so no sharing this until next week. Here we have our costs per square metre of doing the retrofit and the maintenance costs. Here we have the energy costs or benefits, and here we have the implications for that particular building on neighbours. Obviously, if you had a building that had more thermal mass or better insulation and so forth, that might be less of an impact. So that's very building specific, but you can see that there is a significant impact there. But here is the drum roll. So opening up windows has a decreased transmission, so 50% less people get sick. So that's good. So in the mixed ventilation, we can already improve it just by opening the windows and running our system full ball, but there's energy costs, right? And neighbours costs, and obviously greater impact to climate change. In-ceiling filters gave us about the same benefit as opening the windows. So that is a very viable, quick way that we could retrofit our buildings and provide that reduced transmission implication without the energy implication. So, but there is a maintenance cost there. You can see that there. So here, I'd love to be in a room and be able to eyeball you all and get you to guess what the displacement ventilation benefit was. So we found a reduction in transmission by over 80%. In fact, it was 83%. So if you are trying to attract tenants back in, if you're trying to bring them back in, then displacement ventilation is a real option. This was a 70s building, floor to ceiling height of 270, which, you know, is very normal. And we got these benefits with a very old HVAC system, a system that's being like a building that's being knocked down next week. So really huge outcomes there. So this is basically summarising what I've just said. I would like to highlight the limitations that this was a very quick pilot project. You know, we got into the building, installed all these systems, did all the baselines within 3 months. It's an existing building with tenants in it, so we didn't have carte blanche as far as playing with the system. We couldn't get all the stuff we wanted to do the tests because of COVID. We had a couple of fire out calls which shut the building down for weeks. So it was, as far as project goes, it was really hard. But given all of that, excellent result. And this project just looked at the air side and the health side, not the temperature side of things. Although, of course, we had to meet buildings' temperature requirements, comfort requirements. So here are my details. Feel free to follow me up and share this as soon as it comes out in the news. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Dominic. That's amazing findings. And just a reminder, what we'll do is we'll check with you the date that goes public before we share the recording. Yep, sounds like a plan. Great. Now let me just share. We're on to our next presenter now, which is Devan. Are you there, Devan? Yes, I hope you're still there. Devan. Yep, great. Right. Devan is a manager based in Sydney with the International Wellbeing Institute, Asia Pacific team, where he provides technical and market development support to stakeholders across the region. Devan works alongside organisations to unlock the opportunities afforded by the Wellbeing Standard and ensure that they remain at the forefront of the global health and wellbeing movement. Over to you now, Devan, to talk through the WELL certification.
Perfect. Can you see my screen, Danielle, just
Yep.
to confirm? Awesome. Well, thank you for the introduction and thanks for that presentation, Dom. That was fascinating. I'm also looking forward to learning a little bit more. So for my part today, I'm just going to share really three key parts of the presentation. The first will be just a little bit about why health and wellbeing is important within the built environment and the role that the built environment has in delivering good health and wellbeing outcomes. The second is just a bit of an overview of the well building standards. Some of you may not be familiar with it. And then also just talk quite a bit about some of the evolutions and changes that have taken place in the last 5 years, and particularly in the last 2 years with COVID. And then finally, just share some case studies from City Switch signatories. There's a couple of case studies that I'd like to talk through. But I always like to start off by starting with this slide, asking people what determines the state of our health. For a long time, people thought that it was genes or medical care or the lifestyle choices that we make that was the biggest determinant of our health. The CDC released some research reports a few years ago and actually determined that the physical and social environments that we spend our time in is by far the biggest determinant of our health. Things around, the physical environment that we're in, our friend groups, social support structures, all of these things are actually bigger than medical care, access to medical care, genes, and lifestyle behaviors. And this is from the CDC in the States, so it carries a lot of weight. And that's because the physical environment really encompasses how we behave, how we act, what type of habits we have, et cetera, et cetera. Now, in Australia, there's some pretty interesting stats. So the Department of Public Health released a report about 5 years ago, which basically spoke about Australia's spending towards preventative healthcare. 1 in 2 Australians currently have a chronic health illness, and more than 95% of Australians over their lives will have some form of a chronic health illness. Now, it's estimated that approximately 1/3 of these illnesses are preventable. And even on the back of that, Australia only spends 1.5% of health spending towards prevention. 98.5% is towards healthcare treatment or disease treatment. Now, when you factor that, coupled with the fact that the physical and social environment is the biggest determinant of our health, we feel quite strongly at IWBI that we could use buildings and the real estate as a form of preventative healthcare. So if we can really focus on having good physical spaces, good social environments, it's actually a really good form of public healthcare. It's a form of prevention. And that's why we try and put people at the front of everything that we do. We try and improve human health through the places we live, work, play, and we try and do it at scale so that as many people in as many places as possible can feel the benefits of that. And that's why the International Wellbeing Institute was born about 10 years ago, to really try and merge these two and deliver good health and wellbeing outcomes across the globe. We are a global organization, so I think we're in about 110 different countries that make use of the Wellbeing certification scheme, which I'll talk a little bit about later. Headquartered in New York, but we've got presence across the globe. And so it really is a universal type framework and approach that we take. we've experienced very significant and exponential growth in the last 2 years in particular, but it's been quite steady since the introduction in 2014. You can see there around 2019, there was just an exponential growth in the use of well across the globe. Now, that's partly because of the health and wellbeing movement before COVID, and there was a lot of great momentum then. But it's also because of COVID and organizations wanting to putting a spotlight on health and wellbeing and ensuring that their spaces deliver good health and wellbeing for their own staff. And that growth is continuing at the moment as organizations and workplaces try and bring staff back into the office. They're starting to look to us and our programs as an incentive to get people back into the office and to instill confidence that they're taking the steps to look after their health and well-being, even with COVID very much in the community. And so it's evident that's really what we do at Untitled BI is we try and merge real estate and use the physical built environment and organizations to deliver health and well-being outcomes. Because we know that both the physical environment and organizations themselves are key to impacting physical health, mental health, and social health. And these are 3 key components of health. So I just want to talk a little bit about the actual well building standard, just mindful that not everyone has a kind of understanding of what it is. So this will just be a very basic introduction to it. The well-building standard was developed over 5 years with over 5 years worth of research. It was released in 2014 and it's evolved quite significantly and since then. It really applies the science of how physical and social environments impact human health, but not just health, also well-being and performance. And it's comprised of policies, operational procedures, and also design strategies that are focused on how an organization can put health at the center of their decision-making processes. It's done through 10 different concepts. In Australia, you might be familiar with categories. Within those 10 categories, there's over 120 different features, or what you might know as credits. And each of those deliver a specific health and well-being outcome. There's a set of criteria that organizations need to meet. Once you meet that, you can demonstrate that you've met that threshold. Now, one thing importantly to mention about the well-building standard is that it's underpinned by research. So there's over 7,000 peer-reviewed studies and citations, and that's really important because we're dealing with health and well-being. It's got to be correct, and so there's a lot of science and research that underpins this. At the moment, there's over 30,000 locations. I think we're actually on 34,000 locations that are across the globe. And in Australia, we've actually got amongst the highest level of market saturation anywhere in the globe. So it's around about 25% of commercial space in Australia is engaged in a well program. Now, although Australia is only the 4th biggest market across the globe, we don't see that same level of market saturation in places like China, India, the US, Canada, or anywhere else. So it's very much well understood by the market. Now, I mentioned that it's not just about the physical design of the building. IWBI recognizes that the organizations and the workplaces and our employers themselves, through their own policies, have just a bigger impact on our health and well-being, as does the physical built environment. So if you think of things around parental leave, family support, policies around volunteering, all of these things don't necessarily have to do with the physical environment, but it's about how the organization, what policies they have that can impact health and well-being. So the well-building standard is about a third physical design, about a third around the ongoing operations, and about a third around policies that are relevant to the staff or the people that are inside the building. Similar to, say, Green Star and other rating tools that you might be familiar with, it is a points-based system with 4 different levels of certification, all the way from bronze up to platinum. And quite differently to other rating schemes, it's not out of 100 points, which is what many others are. It's out of about 240 points. So there's a lot more flexibility in how projects surpass these different thresholds. And that's I guess, an acknowledgement that health and well-being is very different to all different organizations. And so you can't really limit it to only a handful of interventions. And the last thing I'll mention around the overview is it's not just about the design of the building, it's also about the ongoing performance of the building. So WELL has built into it performance verification, where you test the air and the water quality, and you actually demonstrate that you're performing as designed. And you only get your certification once you can demonstrate that. And lastly, there's many different types of sectors that use well. So it's very universal. We don't just see commercial. It's probably the biggest of the lot, but also things, airports, healthcare, education buildings. We've got some large iconic stadiums like Eden Park that's just been well certified. And again, that's because all these buildings are managed, and it's those policies that can have a good impact on that. Now, before I get to the case studies, I just want to talk a little bit about how well has evolved over the last 10 years since it was introduced, or 8 years, and focus a little bit post or in the last year since the COVID pandemic's been around. Now, as I mentioned, health and wellness is something very different to every organization, and no organization has the same approach, has the same priorities, and it's very much a journey. So they're all starting at different stages within that journey. So, some organizations might really care about addressing stress and burnout, and that's something that's very topical at the moment, with COVID around, and that's obviously been a big emotional drain on many people's lives, lots of mental and physical health implications as a result. Advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion could be another priority for a different organization. Many organizations, particularly in Australia, with a bit of a skills shortage at the moment, are trying to win the war on talent. And so there's all these different types of health and well-being approaches, and they're looking to because of the flexibility and the dynamic nature of it, to be able to achieve these goals. So what does that mean? Let's say an organization has the key goal of reducing employee stress and burnout. They'll look to and to the well framework to build a strategy to be able to use that as the end outcome. So this is just an example of a series of different features that all are linked or related to reducing employee stress and burnout. And we often work with clients to identify what are their goals, what's the vision for health and well-being, and let's build a really strong strategy to be able to deliver that. Employee engagement and retention, that's another big one that we see quite often. Obviously, I mentioned diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's quite big. So it's very quite diverse. Now, one of the things that I'll mention on this slide is the scope of what WELL typically addresses has changed significantly in the last 5 or 6 years. It really was initially focused on the design of the building and things around air quality, water quality, light, acoustics, etc. But there's so many new topics that are included within the framework that are absolutely important to health and well-being. And one that was actually developed within the Australian community, something like victims of domestic violence. And that was something that we heard from the Australian property sector to say, hey, look, an employer has a responsibility to protect their own staff from domestic violence at home. And if they're suffering from that, we have an obligation to support them. And so that's just a good example of the scope of what WELL addresses. It's very much moved into that social sustainability realm as well, and not just health and well-being metrics. Another thing that's changed quite significantly post-COVID is just the scale of how WELL is used. It very much used to be focused on individual buildings, and you get a WELL certification for 350 George Street, or an individual asset. What we found is that we were getting big properties, that developers coming to us and saying, I've got these 10 different assets. We're submitting the same documentation 10 times. It's being reviewed 10 times. It's just very inefficient. We actually want to use these policies and these design guidelines at scale across all of our assets. And so we've developed what's called the WELL at Scale approach, which is effectively, getting these things recognized across a large, not just portfolio, but across a global footprint of assets. And that's been quite a significant change, and it certainly has led to some of the growth. But there's still a lot of flexibility around what organizations use WELL for. So some of them use them for specific buildings, individual buildings, and so they could use something called the health safety rating, which is a subset of WELL certification, really focused on disease and infection control. They could look at individual certifications, one building asset that goes through the design that incorporates the interventions, or they could look at rolling this out across their entire portfolio, which is a pretty exciting development. And what that allows us to do is to really work up towards providing organizations with ultimately a score of how they're performing across everything, not just the management of their assets, but their policies, their operations, etc. So you can have individual design strategies for specific buildings. Maybe that's focused on thermal comfort. Maybe that's focused on your air quality. You can then move one up and have individual ratings underneath this well at scale approach. You could have individual buildings certify within that. And once you aggregate all of that, you could get an organizational score that's reflective of all the efforts that your organization makes across health and well-being. And that's really good for something like ESG reporting, which is obviously a huge topic in the real estate at the moment. And so we're typically seeing organizations look to well to benchmark their performance and actually use it to report and improve over time. And we've seen many clients, that have used well specifically for ESG reporting. And it's not necessarily just the property developers that you kind of associate that would use well, but you can see here organizations like Uber, like Goldman Sachs are amongst the type of cohort that aren't necessarily property developers, but they all occupy space, they all have staff, they all have their own policies that they implement within their workplace. And so all of that's recognized. Now, I just want to move on to a couple of case studies.
Devan, we might only have time for one. We've only got a couple of, say, three to 5 minutes before I need to
perfect.
get onto the Q&A.
No,
yeah, thanks.
All right, so I'll stick to, I'll go through them quickly because they're not too big. But the first one I want to talk about is Landers and Rogers, which is a law firm, an Australian law firm based in Melbourne, or actually based across Australia. They went through a process of finding a new office space, 477 Collins in Melbourne. That's where they settled on. It's about just short of 6,000 square meters over 2.5 floors, which includes open plan workplaces, meeting rooms, and breakout rooms. Last month, they were awarded WELL's certification, and they actually achieved it at the platinum level. So they really did exceed the framework, if you like it. Now, the legal profession is quite well known for having instances of anxiety, depression, mental health related issues. This is part of the nature of the work, but also the pressure and the demands of the actual job. And so Landers and Rogers recognized this, and they stated that they wanted to take the physical and mental wellness of their people seriously. And so they didn't just say that, they actually acted on that by looking towards the WELL certification, getting their spaces certified. Their focus was to try and reduce any factors that contributed negatively to an individual's health and well-being, but also to deliver programs and support that enhance their productivity and their work-life satisfaction. So a bit of both, but trying to prevent negative impacts, but also promote positive. They stated they took a very positive and holistic approach to wellness. So they kind of had 5 key pillars. That was physical health, mental health, community and belonging, purpose and meaning, and then also personal safety. And that was what the strategic lens that they looked through to deliver these interventions across health and wellness. They really did exceed the standard. And so they had all different types of interventions, from hybrid working to really strong policies around caring and parental leave that were above industry norm, access to well-being sessions and counseling, subsidies for well-being sessions, including Pilates, yoga, and massages for their staff when they're working overtime. Things around vaccinations, so flu vaccinations, COVID vaccinations, skin checks. They obviously had indoor plants scattered throughout to promote that biophilia. This is a good example of some of the natural materials that they used. So there was timber that was integrated throughout, and also things like ergonomic and height adjustable desks so that they could promote physical activity within the space, as well as having a staircase within that. Daniel, I might then take you up on that and just leave the last one. If anyone has any questions on another case study around CBUS property, then I'd be happy to chat offline about that or in the Q&A.
Sure. Thanks, Devan. I will just go back to sharing my screen. Yes, so sorry to cut that short. It was very interesting. I'm kind of interested to hear about the CBUS one and myself. So we just might go into the Q&A session just quickly now. I'm mindful that if we do have time at the end, Devan, I might sort of throw back to you. It depends if there's lots of questions or not, but we need the time for the chat room. So just in case, if there's any questions, if you'd like to either put your hand up or unmute or put something into the chat, then we will we'll see if we can get that answered for you. Feel free to ask a question of either Dominic or Devan, and I'm sure they would be more than happy to answer. Let me just see, what do we have in the chat? Katie, can you see the chat? Because I can't see the chat.
I can see the chat, and I think that might be the only place to ask questions. I don't think I can unmute people in the format
right.
that we're running this. So yes, I can see the chat, but there's no questions. So,
that's all right.
Yeah, pop your questions in there, everyone.
Because I've got one for issue that I'm dying to ask, if you don't mind. So I'll just get the ball rolling. So Dominic, for you with the breath project, that was actually really fascinating. I'm amazed at the result of that, especially the 83%. That's just an amazing result. And I think the implication of that for everybody in an office could be really significant. If a site, particularly an older site, wanted to investigate doing something like that or implementing this sort of distributed airflow, where would they start? Like, who do they call?
Like Ghostbusters.
Yes.
So the partner that installed the system was AG Coombs.
Right.
But any of your air conditioning consultants will be able to. It's not hard technology. It's just a filter that's taken from the ceiling and brought to the ground, and the pipes connected. There's no fancy filters. There's no additional fans or energy or anything. So in fact, we carried the system back to CH2 yesterday, and each one weighs about 5 kilos, so I could have one in each hand and walk it back to our building. So quite simple systems, no additional energy. It's just bringing that air down at a lower level. So any air conditioning industry engineer, the main reasons that it hasn't been widely taken up is that it has implications on your layout. Obviously, you want that air blanketing the ground and then coming up. And if you've got lots of partitions and so forth, then you're stopping that process from happening.
Yeah, makes sense. Wow. Okay. Hopefully, a few of you are starting to think about who you're going to call to get your air distribution sorted out soon. For you, Devan, if someone wanted to look at certifying, what is the time frame from sort of starting the process to finishing or to obtaining a WELL certification?
It all depends on where you're at in terms of the policies that you have as an organisation, the timeline of your development. We typically see anything from a small place might getting the entry level certification in a matter of months up until 2-3 years as they work through the process. A lot of the time, organizations, there's a lot of existing buildings that have WELL certification, and I think that's important to note. It's not just about new buildings, and for those existing buildings, it's often about the policies that the organization has. And to develop those policies and get those approved can often be quite time consuming. So we typically find that's quite a bit of a holdup, but it can be anything from 6 months to 2 years, just depending on how quick they act and where they act in terms of the policies and the design of the building.
Right. And in terms of the framework, is the framework available to anyone to have a look at without actually having to go through the certification process?
Yeah, absolutely.
So they can look and see what's involved and maybe
Totally.
apply it's not for them anyway.
I'll put a link in here for anyone that's interested, but it's all freely available. There's a lot of IWBI has made everything, all our resources and education and free to access. So there's no paying for anything, no webinars or anything. So you could if you're interested in this, there's a lot of great valuable resources that you can look into.
Great. I've got a couple of questions come through. One from Jeff at ANZ. I've heard the WELL pricing structure is changing. Are you able to elaborate on the WELL at scale?
Sure, Jeff. So essentially, the pricing structure at the moment is based on a square footage. So I think it's 1 US cent per square foot. That's included in the WELL at scale approach. The WELL health safety has been incredibly effective by looking at it at a individual location perspective. And so we're moving from a per square foot to a number of locations to determine the price. Now that's only coming into effect on the 1st of July, and anyone that registers or has the old price before the 1st of July is basically able to use that pricing for at least 5 years. So even though we're moving to a new pricing structure, it won't make any difference if you do enroll around the 1st of July to go into that. But it's basically moving from a square foot determinant to a number of locations determinant.
Thank you. You've got another one from Roz at ANMF about how long does a WELL certification last for? So what's the time frame?
Yeah, good question. So it's 3 years. So at the 3-year mark, you need to recertify. And in order to recertify, you need to retest some of those key parameters. So you need to retest the air. You need to test that the water is still at a certain quality. So it's just about doing that performance verification, and that's because things do change, things do degrade, and it's just making sure that that building's still performing to that level. So it's 3 years, and then it lasts. It's every 3 years from then on.
Great, terrific. I don't have any other questions here, so I think what we might do now, Katie, is maybe go to. Oh, sorry, Dominique.
I was wondering if Well is working with Neighbours or Green Star. I think you are working with Green Star, but I thought the rest might be interested.
Yes, absolutely. So we've got crosswalks with both of those. So basically what that means is if you're pursuing Green Star and Well, we won't make you provide the same documentation. We've already done that work for you. So let's say thermal comfort as an example. If you achieve the thermal comfort credit for Green Star, you don't need to provide any additional documentation for Well certification, because we've worked out that although they may not be exactly the same, they're meeting the same intent. The one's been assessed and awarded, so that's totally fine with us. We're also busy developing a crosswalk with the latest Green Star buildings rating tool, which was launched in the end of 2020. And then also globally, things like LEED, BREEAM, we've got crosswalks with all of those, which is an awesome resource.
Right. Thank you. If there's no other questions come through yet, then I think what I'll do, I'm just going to put this screen up because I'm going to go into the breakout rooms just for 10 minutes, and I just thought it would be useful to have some questions to talk about rather than just go in there and look at each other. So the two questions I thought you might find interesting to discuss, and you can change these around if you want to. So what's the one thing you learned today or found the most interesting? And what do you think your business could do to improve health and safety and wellbeing in your office? We're not going to ask you to come back and report back. It's really just for a discussion purposes. So Katie, could you put us into the breakout rooms?
Yep, happy to do that. And there's a room for myself, Danny, Ali, and Dominique. And there's about 6 people in each room, and we can have a conversation about these questions. Thanks, Danny.
Terrific. All right, I'll see you in the other side. I'll need to stop sharing, do I? There we go.